Good morning, everyone. So I decided to invert a bit the order of the lectures. First because, I don't know, I just feel like. But then it turned out that the question and answer section is going to happen together with Scott's presentation. And his presentation is on informality. So I think that if I finish with informality, there will stay a few questions also for him. So it seems that from what I was going to do, we also have some, better logistic arrangement. Thinking of, I never considered myself studying memory, which is the main, the starting point of this lecture, until I realized that actually memory has at least two sides. One is what today we remember from yesterday, but the other one is what today we construct for tomorrow. So on one hand, you could look at memory as, okay, how now memory is preserved and is continued and is manipulated. But on the other hand, you could look at memory the way it is constructed today. So how you want to be remembered, how you want a certain nation or identity or idea to be remembered tomorrow. And the way it's going to be remembered tomorrow is going to be shaped by the way today you kind of create, invent, as often said, and kind of market that. Do marketing for this idea. So what I'm going to share now is just my personal path in terms of how I got into this thing and how this is done with reference to the region we are kind of all keen on. My first encounter with my PhD was on identity policy. So how identity is constructed, how identity is lived in a city, which is kind of bilingual, which is kind of bi-ethnical, but is at the same time where there is a very strong attempt to construct a national discourse. And by doing this, I kind of identified two channels of construction of identity. One channel that is the one kind of broadly studied in the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s, which is how an elite is kind of constructing the idea of the nation, and how this elite, this idea of the nation is inculcated, is kind of passed to the people. So you have, of course, a constitution. The constitution will say this is our national flag, and this is our national language, and then you have the ministries that say, oh, this is not our national history, this is our whatever. All the symbols, the holidays, museums. The places of memory. When you have a museum is why you're having a museum that remembers this but doesn't remember that. Why you have a flag which is this color and not this color? Because you can claim, well, there's a national flag, but most countries, they are made of different units, and then each unit has a flag, and now the national flag has to represent all of them, or has to say, okay, we're not taking this one, we take this one. Why? So you have the kind of the political discourse, the political elites that make a decision. But there is also another discourse. Not discourse. There is also, once, say, I propose an idea to you, you still have the possibility, you still have the chance to reject the idea. It is not because I say that we're going to have lunch today at 12 that you're going to come today at 12. Some of you might have something to do, some of you might be late, some of you might just decide not to come. So put this from a very, very kind of micro perspective into a larger one. Actors that are concerned, that are kind of in charge of passing a message, can also reject or transform the message. In as much as people who are the recipient, the takers of this message, the users of this, the final user of the message, can still not listen to the message, not to understand the message, or simply reject the message. I think that today we have a policy which goes completely against what you want to do. What are you going to say? I mean, think that tomorrow in Kazakhstan they say now the national language is going to be German. Are you going to, of course, I understand in some cases you will not just go into the street and do the classical contentious politics thing, going out and say, no, we don't want to speak German. But there are also other ways. And this was emerging very clearly from my fieldwork. My field was in Ukraine, but I was in a Russian-speaking city. So what happens if, in a Russian-speaking city that has traditionally spoken Russian since its establishment, now the state is saying, you are Ukrainian? What I say? I mean, objecting this thing openly would sound like kind of an act of reaction. Say, no, it's like, you don't want to be Ukrainian? Of course you want to be Ukrainian, but we just want to be Ukrainian in a different way. We are not Ukrainian the way you are kind of proposing us to be Ukrainian, which is like we should speak Ukrainian from the morning to the evening. We are Ukrainian, or we speak Russian. Where is the problem? And this was kind of, so we had a national message that was coming from that kind of the national elites, and it was kind of mediated little by little by the mid actors. So a national policy is decided at the parliament level, but then you have the ministry that had to translate this policy into instructions. So you still have the people in the ministry, they need to understand what was the intention of the policy, and they had to translate this into kind of concrete instructions that will be then passed off to regional administrations. Regional administration will receive those things, but try to imagine somebody who is a Russian speaker in the regional administration of Odessa, where you see, and you need to speak Ukrainian. And of course, and this goes all the way to, I mean, I was examining teachers. So you have teachers, the teachers are, I mean, if a teacher is a Russian speaker and they have instruction, you have to speak Ukrainian. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? You cannot say, no, I'm not going to speak Ukrainian because that's a national language. But what you can do is to find a way around. So what I was finding in my case was that the teacher would enter the class, would say, good morning in Ukrainian, and then speak in Russian for the rest of the class. Then at the end of the class, it was finished. They say, now everything is clear. Okay, let's go back to Ukrainian. And they say goodbye in Ukrainian. And I think there would be kind of, people would be switching from one language to the other, depending on how they want to, depending on the context. And in official occasion, they will start in Ukrainian, then they understand the other person is a Russian speaker, they just switch to Russian. And we all know that we are in Ukraine. So it was not an act of dissidence, it was not an act of rejection for the national kind of language and culture. It was just a different way. And this is why I was arguing that what changes identity, what kind of defines identity was not the language, but the attitude to language. If you were not speaking, or you were trying to speak, but your Ukrainian was very bad, but you still say, claiming that you were speaking Ukrainian, that would be enough in some places. But of course, in as much as this is also depends on the acceptance of other groups, if you go into places that have a bit more radical vision on the thing, like many cities in Western Ukraine, it would be a bit more difficult to claim that you are, because they would say, yeah, but you speak Russian. Whereas in other places, language would not be an issue. All this to say that, this led me to conceptualize what I start calling spontaneous nation building. That is a bit like what Erikson would say, informal nation building. So the way identity is performed and is kind of promoted not through official channels, but through everyday life and through other measures. That could be either that the elites were putting through a certain policy without knowing that it was a policy, and that this is a kind of had the effect of enhancing the kind of national identity, or kind of forming national identity. Because even if the elites, they put forward something and people do not agree, and they massively do not agree, they will all identify with this disagreement. They will kind of create some kind of cohesion more than the policy in itself. Or I think that the 2004 Orange Revolution in Ukraine, where you had a kind of street protests and up to 1 million people in the streets, did more for Ukrainian language than any other thing until then. Because by then, they were identifying Russia as the enemy. And then they were saying, so all the scene, all the singers, in the protest scene, they were speaking Ukrainian, even if they were Russian speakers. Even if their language of preference was Russian, even if the first language was Russian, they would stick to Ukrainian to say, this is the language of the country I'm defending. And now, I don't have anything about anything against Russian language. I'm just using it as a facade. Then you would see in the streets and in communication, they were using both. I mean, Russian was extremely well received. They would use one or the other. But people in it themselves, they took a stand, and this stand then gave momentum to the language to the point that Ukrainian became spoken in the country. Before, it was kind of stigmatized in many respects. After that point, it was not stigmatized anymore. And then you have more and more kind of people who either switch, or switch to Ukrainian, or they simply kind of use both. So to me, that was spontaneous in the sense that this was not a measure conceived to enhance identity. This was just a measure. It was just a political protest, started from the opposition. But this political protest gave more emphasis to the language than many formal policies. So that's one thing. Spontaneous nationalism, I define it as, one, a measure that was not intended for creating kind of a marker of identity, but ended up creating it, or something that is originated from the bottom. So one person did it, 2 persons, 3 persons, and then it became a national symbol. Now, by doing this, the first stage of the project was this book, where I proposed a friend of mine, Rico, to work on to work on something was like, we've been always looking at the way politicians propose things, but what about, are there any other actors doing this? Can identity be kind of performed or proposed through different channels? And in this respect, the starting idea was, well, actually, yes. This was kind of a side project from a special issue of a journal. And then we started looking at what are the non-traditional foci of nation building, of identity construction. So Rico at the time was working on cinema. Now, the cinema industry can be sponsored by the state in many respects. He was working on cinema in Kazakhstan. The cinema industry could be promoted by the state, but then the message you give in a movie is not 100% controlled. They will say, do a film about the Kazakh nation. We give you money for a film about the Kazakh nation, but the way this is interpreted by the director and by the people and the story, it's not necessarily under 100% control of the people who were promoting national identity. So the idea was, how could cinema, how could both of the cinema industry create a sense of identity that persists and remains? So Rico, he was joking, saying, I just got a chance, I just got an excuse to watch a few Kazakh movies and say it's work. But he was going through a number of movies, looking at the national narrative that was constructed. There was another chapter about the Lagoon Dam in Tajikistan. There was officially, it was informally an economic project. They wanted to control water and to produce hydropower. But at the same time, the way it had been promoted, in a way that people would just identify with this grandiose project. There is something called economic nationalism, where if you identify with economic prosperity and say, I'm part of the nation that is, a part of this country or the nation that brings economic prosperity, it is actually very kind of, it might promote a certain kind of identity. And the same thing in the same book we had the Eurovision, it was Eurovision festival in Azerbaijan. So how the image of the country had been promoted for, internally, the image that would be given to tourists would be kind of sent, and the message would be sent out, and possibly will also fall back onto the people, showing this kind of prosperity, showing a number of things. Constructing a national imaginary, constructing the way Azerbaijan was not necessarily, but this was the idea they wanted to give. And in the end, I mean, historically, if you look at the way nations have been constructed, there is also, I mean, a great part of a nation is about memory, but another great part is about oblivion. You just should not just remember things, but you also forget things. You forget where this is coming from. I mean, if I have to quote, I mean, there is a French book on the construction of the French identity in the 18th and 19th century, and it was not about just giving a French identity. It was also getting people to forget what they were. So just going into the provinces and say, "Oh, well, you are French. Yes, but I'm also from here. Yes, but you are French. You are French and from here." And emphasizing and kind of, there was a policy of moving teachers around, so the teacher would not be the local one, would be from one place to the other, so the people would be obliged to speak French, because the teacher had been educated in French, and they would go into another region where they had another dialect or another language, but they could not, it was not intelligible as it would be to a local teacher. And it could get to the point where, I don't know if, I mean, somebody quotes, I give you a candy if you say, "Yeah, I'm French." "Yeah, I'm French," and then you get a candy, and then it goes on and on and on. And in the end, it's like, it's not just you remember who you are, but you also forget any other ambiguities that you might have. So this was the starting point. But the starting point, I mean, I was satisfied to a certain extent about this, because we are looking at non-traditional approaches, in which also my chapter is, I mean, that's the heavy part, and I'm going to show you some pictures. But like how the presidential, the personality cult in Turkmenistan was also, in my view, an act of nation building. Because as long as you take a stand for the president or against the president, you use the president as a reference. And in as much as this is a reference, this forms, I mean, this could be considered an identity marker. Now, the project went on, and it went more to the kind of the everyday level. What happens here and there, and in this is it is connected to my next point on informality. But what is everyday? The everyday is how people perform identities on a daily basis, and how this identity gets reproduced and massively kind of passed on to the rest of the population. I mean, I'm referring here, I mean, to the concept of infrapolitics by Scott, where he says an insignificant action that is performed by thousands of people every day, so millions of times. What's going to happen, I mean, what happens is that it can kind of affect the way people perceive this action and the way that people perceive themselves. So from this one, we started looking at more kind of mundane actions, more kind of not just everyday, but just things that look insignificant. So we were looking at boycott campaigns. Boycott campaigns are boycott campaigns. But if a boycott campaign means we promote national products and we do not buy other ones, and this goes all the way up to the point that the national, a government kind of restricts imports of certain goods on the basis of consumer preferences, I mean, plus ideology, this is an act of national building. This is a construction of an identity, a construction of an imaginary of a nation. The same thing could be done if you look at non-traditional actors, companies. I mean, look at how influential a company might be by influencing consumer preferences. Of course, there is no recipe to say this product is going to win. This product is going to be the one that kind of goes, this video is the one going viral, this song is going to be viral. You cannot predict this, but you could help the process. I mean, by a very strong marketing strategy, you can promote something to the point that people get used to it. So, and we refer to the point now to when say the flag lays limp. So, I mean, we think of nationalism as the place and as the phenomenon through which somebody comes with a flag and just waves the flag. But actually, nationalism is also the phenomenon through which the flag stands there and nobody notices it. Because if you do not notice, that's the normality for you. And as much as it's normality, it means you accept it. So I also refer to Gene Sharp's idea of acceptance. It says, well, you can accept, you can support actively a dictator, you can support actively a politician, you can support actively any political actor, but you also can support it passively, which means you do nothing about it. And this is as important as active support to a certain phenomenon or to a certain personality or to whatever you're looking for. So the flag that kind of lies limp is a flag that is, I mean, in as much as no one is going there to take it out, that's part of your identity. It's when you start kind of considering those things normal. So we have, I mean, okay, with I started moving in the direction of consumption. So consumption, I mean, by consuming certain goods, you create, I mean, kind of an idea of what are the goods that should be considered kind of national goods, what are the goods of the good national of the citizen or the. But there were also other chapters like, okay, the construction of memory in museums. As I was saying, first of all, the question is, what kind of museum we're going to create? We're going to support this idea or this idea, but also what kind of items we're going to put in the museum, and what is the explanation of the museum? I mean, why those things are there, why those things are not there? And I'm referring, I mean, in the books there is a chapter on the Georgian Museum, and I don't know if you're aware that there are at least three museums of Soviet occupation in Latvia, in Estonia, and in Georgia. And the narrative of museum occupation is, and this is from the Estonian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Estonia is a republic created in 1918, and it exists since 1918. Well, it was occupied for 50 years, but Estonia dates back to 1918, which is slightly in counter tendency to what textbooks, at least in Russia and in most of the Soviet Union, will say. Because they will say, well, Estonia was part of the Soviet Union. And then by creating, I mean, a museum of occupation, you really construct a narrative. And even if people do not visit, even Estonians do not visit a museum of occupation, they will go there and they will say, we have a museum of occupation. They walk, and they have nothing against it. So they they swallow the narrative that, yeah, there was an occupation. So the Georgian Museum, I mean, the Georgians, instead of having a whole museum, they had a section of a national museum. But still, the idea was the same. The message was not as convincing. I mean, I visited the two. It's not as convincing as the Estonian and Latvian one. But still, they were trying to construct this idea. I'm thinking of, I don't know if you're aware, the Museum of Anti-Terrorist Operations in Dnipro, in Ukraine, where they show the results of the war, and they have pictures of people who have died, and then have picture of the front, and they are constructing a narrative which is, in a sense, giving support to an idea of national identity that is constructing enemies, and then kind of taking a stand and just saying we are for, I mean, we kind of cry our people who died in this in this situation. So just make sure I didn't forget that. Yeah, I mean, we also were looking at music. I mean, the way, I mean, not just cinema, so performative arts, starting from cinema, but also music, and whatever gets kind of wider and wider. This is, and interest in the project was very, very high because we started with one book, and we had to publish two books because there were not enough space in one book. Also because publishers don't want books that are too long because then they spend too much money on it. But then we also got a proposal from Tauris, which is now Bloomsbury, to have this thing, and we submitted to both. The idea is still, I mean, still stays. It's like how the way you kind of you perform identity is as important as the way you just receive identity. And receiving identity, you still have the choice to kind of accept it, reject it, or simply renegotiate it. I mean, you don't have to accept 100%. You can say, I accept this much, but this is, we simply cannot do it. I mean, I simply cannot speak another language. I simply cannot change my face. I mean, this is, but you can still look at the way you perceive yourself, and you construct this kind of narrative, and the way you are received. Now, just to give you an example of how memory can be constructed. I mean, my reference is still a book which is from 1989, which is The Invention of Traditions. So the idea is that traditions are not there. It's not God that brought us traditions. Traditions are there because someone put them there, and either they rediscovered them, or they invented them. They invented them because you have to find a compromise at some point between the elites, between the countries, between the economic and political elites on what you can say and what you cannot say. And there is a myriad of of examples throughout history where this was made possible. All the alliances, all the whatever national idea was put through in whatever case. I mean, think of Sunday. I mean, okay, in most of Europe now, I mean, in France and Germany, Sunday is the day when shops are closed. Now, in as much as we say we are secular states, Sunday is the day of the Lord, and this is why traditionally the shops are closed. So we are secular, but not that much. Okay, you don't go to church, but still you celebrate. I mean, for Christmas, everybody goes home and say, "Well, I'm not working." So it's a hybrid. It's not really like we are secular, we are not secular. It's about what I can live with and what I cannot. So I had the chance to go to a place which is possibly the most virgin in terms of research, because it's Turkmenistan, and I was there already in 2000. I mean, I was regularly there since 2009, and then you could see. I mean, Turkmenistan is a place. It's a relatively small republic in terms of population. So we have the population estimated at 4-5 million. Of course, official statistics are not always kind of how to say. They're not necessarily reflecting real numbers, because as a friend of mine would say, in a kind of Stalin or Soviet fashion, you try to increase the amount of population to show that you are kind of more powerful. It is a place where that once got independent from the Soviet Union, they had very little of kind of national traditions in terms of encompassing the whole nation. Because there are kind of tribes, they have their tradition, they have their ideas, but how to bring together all of them. So I'll just give you an example of what I saw, which could be, and then we just move to the question. I mean, so this is a picture that I like a lot. We were on a stage surrounded by Turkmen carpets, so everywhere. We had the impression that in Turkmenistan, everyone has, I mean, those carpets, they are very, very expensive, because it takes years to weave them. So, and each tribe, each factory, and then each tribe, and they have different patterns. You could see which patterns are from what. So we were surrounded by those marvelous carpets, and it was just the foreigners. It was the foreigners and the people invited. We were in a village, and the people from the village were not invited. So this girl was trying to understand what was going on, and she was picking and seeing that all the musicians and all the foreigners and all the food and all the vodka and all the vodka was still allowed at the time. This is the health path, and Jamal, I'm sorry for giving you this nostalgia, but anyway, that's the health path, because that was constructed with the idea of showing that, I mean, it's really continuation of the Soviet ideology, because what was happening in Turkmenistan is that many things that were used to create cohesion at the national level were coming from the Soviet Union. They were just reinterpreted. Because there was no alternative, there was not really, they didn't really sit down and think, how can we give this impression? They were just replicating the model, just making it ours, is not Soviet. So this is the health path. It is considered that every man should go and walk the health path all the way through to stay healthy and fit, which is which is a value. So the president would invite all the kind of head of states whenever, and they would have to go there. But the nice thing is also that the president would often go by helicopter to the end of the trail. So in theory, you have to to stay healthy, but you still. So you're creating an imaginary of the nation which is not even real. No imaginary is real. But in this case, it's really you have a clear contradiction. You stay healthy, I'm also healthy, but I go by helicopter. That's this is the way we used to be received whenever we landed into a city. This is the Mary in Eastern Turkmenistan. So we landed at 7 a.m., still sleepy, and we were received by a horde of young men and ladies, young boys and ladies in traditional Turkmen costumes. The brides means that the woman is not married. Whereas when they get married, they just release they just pack their hair. So of course we were flying with Turkmenistan Airlines, where at the time there was still a picture of the president in the air, and we were kind of offered the most genuine Turkmen hospitality and dances. Now, an interesting thing about dances and music in Turkmenistan was that I do not really see the connection between what we were listening to and, what I was taking was kind of disco-like music, like embedded in kind of Middle East melodies, which I really doubt, I was not there during the Soviet period, but I really doubt that they were coming directly from kind of Middle Age and those things. So you have this, and all the costumes, I do not know where they were taken from, but they were very, very, carefully designed and worn by every single person who was performing. And the songs, would you know where the lyrics of the song come from? Well, all of them. There were so many, and they had even Turkmen opera, and in Turkmen.
That did the famous dancing music.
Yeah, but there were so many in every different city, and there was also a law that if you construct a theater, if you build a theater in Ashgabat, which is the capital, you also have to build a theater in all the other cities. And then when we were in Tashgauz in the north, we had a troupe, a theater, performing an opera coming from Ashgabat, because there was nobody able to perform in Tashgauz. So basically the theater was empty. But they had it. So they were constructing the idea that we have a theater in every city. And in as much as this can be seen as artificial, well, you also have the fact that you see it again, you kind of please yourself with thinking that we are a cultural nation, where opera is everywhere. Now, you never go there, but it's there, the building is there. And, I don't know if you can see the beard, which I should switch off the light, but the beard is kind of glued on the chicks. So they are given this image of the wise Turkmen man with a beard and in traditional custom, but to what extent they emphasize certain things, an imaginary of how Turkmen should look like. And just in as much as I doubt that in traditional Turkmen you have this silver kind of, I would see them imported from China rather than that. But you could see how accurate, how careful the creation of this image was we are still at the airport. It's still 7 o'clock. We haven't slept an hour because they took us to the airport at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was like 9, 10 o'clock in Europe. So, and they still dancing all kind of happily, and we then we had a ceremony. We had to bring. Do you know this man? No. And he works in Academy of Science, but now he's a. Anyway, we all had to bring flowers to the whatever poet we were discussing and whatever monument we were going. And I calculated at some point that, anyway, there were roses and expensive flowers. I think I calculated for a conference for a single day, they spent $10,000 in flowers. Because it was a rough calculation, but just try to imagine how much care they put into this thing. I mean, this is really, it's a Soviet thing still, but it's brought to the kind of to ostentation of wealth and ostentation of devotion. So they were just doing it more and more and more, and that was a way to show wealth. And of course, that they respect traditions, and so this is where we are. That's the picture of the president there, which should be everywhere, just to remember that he's there. You have this very nice costumes, and all the foreign delegation that was entering the main building where the conference was happening. And then, of course, music is a value. So every good, educated child should have, I mean, this is coming again directly from the Soviet Union. Every educated child should know at least one instrument. And so the children were performing for us. Again, this is a Turkmen carpet, huge one. I don't know how many meters. And this is a traditional performance with men in traditional costumes, and the president that is overseeing them because he's the father of the nation. But, I mean, in my view, I mean, when I was giving this presentation in a conference in Ulaanbaatar, somebody say, "Oh, so you endorse the president? You are for what?" And I say, "No. If I'm analyzing the fact that the president has a role in the formation of Turkmen identity, I'm not saying that I'm for or against. I'm just looking at the way identity can be also formed not through formal rules like we are Turkmen, we have a flag, but also by things that are, well, this is not necessarily informal, having a picture everywhere. But once you get used to the picture, then it becomes part of national symbols. You want or you don't want. The fact that you refer to the president everywhere, I never, even when they were praying before lunch, I didn't understand the word, but I think I captured the word president. So they were praying for the health of course, God and the president. And bringing this, construct an identification between the president and the nation, and of course yourself. And you want, you don't want. You might reject at some point some elements. There was I had a friend of mine who did a campaign on Yanukovych, who was the president of Ukraine for a few years, and many people were claiming that he had not been elected democratically. So they would say, Yanukovych is not acting as a president. Yanukovych is not our president. And his campaign was, by using the word president associated with this person, you are just legitimating him. So say, so his campaign was, here we have a Chupa Chups, Yanukovych. If you like Yanukovych, eat it. Otherwise, we don't care. I don't use the word president with him because this is just it's not legitimate. And this is again, we are talking at the conference, and the president is overlooking us. And in the end, you get used to it. I mean, you even miss it when it's not there. And this shows how, and then the president is like a factotum. He can do anything. So this is the Museum of Presidential Gifts, I think, or Turkmen history. I mean, there is a museum. Niazov created a museum where he's just collecting the gift that all the other head of states were giving him. And of course, being Turkmenistan the second largest gas source in the world, you have to give him very nice presents if you want the president to like you. So here he is kind of, I don't know where this boat is staying in Turkmenistan. I don't know what kind of Turkmen sea they are. No, the Caspian, yeah. But anyway, there's this very nice yacht, and he is obviously the captain. Then he can drive a car, he can ride a speedboat. But he also is also a normal person. He can sit with the council of the elders and just get advice and give advice, just like every one of us. And of course, he goes out every day to collect cotton, just to encourage the workers. So he's against one of us. I don't know if I have more. Yeah, I think. Okay, again, this is the songs, and we are kind of giving homage to the. And those are dance. I mean, I don't know who took the choreography, but they were very, very kind of well studied, and they were, how to say, always different, always the same. So there was a kind of common matrix, even they were trying to differentiate. And you could see that the customs were very kind of well looked at. This is how one old, wise Turkmen should look like. Mosques, I don't remember, this is from Mary, I think. They are really, I mean, it's very modern. And it's very well, I mean, it's very beautiful. Just to say, I mean, there was a huge investment in the mosque. Of course, I mean, investment into infrastructure and into kind of construction, in the construction industry is the best way to launder money. So this is one side. On the other hand, Turkmen was, I mean, it started a kind of Muslim revival. There was not, I mean, people were Muslim, but the way they were kind of now, Islam was promoted in a way which is very, I mean, the mosque was empty, but at least it's there. It's part of our identity, the fact that we have a mosque, and if you want, you can go there. This is, I was calling it Turkmen Rasta, if you want, if you look at it. But okay, that was the last one. So what I wanted to share here is that the construction of memory is not something that is very far from us. It is not something that is constructed once solemnly and then it goes on. It could also be something which is constructed day by day and which affects each of us in our daily life. So in our kind of banal, insignificant actions that if performed over and over again, they might acquire a certain sense of significance. And they might kind of create some kind of belongings, and they might kind of define some kind of markers. And so I was lucky enough to see this place which was really like transforming every year, not to say every day, and how identity was constructed, how memory was constructed. Because whatever, I mean, if you look at the way Turkmenistan has evolved from the first president to the second, many things have changed, but many things that have been constructed in the by the second president, by Muhammadov, they are based on what Niaza was doing. So it's like you can do the same thing or you can reject it and do it in another way. But they were kind of perpetuating a very logic that is, a narrative that is somehow consistent and is going in more or less in the same direction. Yeah, I stop here solemnly with our friend and see if you have any questions. No, what questions are for the end?
Yes, I suggest we
even for those
thank you
ones.
very much for your lecture.